Hello again, it's me, Roberto. This is my third video, just uploading my thoughts. And as you can probably tell by the title of the video, today is a very special one. I'm just going to be talking about Donald Trump. Um, where to begin? You may by now have realized that America is entering a period of instability, and arguably this has been going on for decades now. Some would trace it back to Reagan, some even before that. Um, But basically, ever since Vietnam, the US has been hobbled as an empire. Its reputation has only seemingly gotten worse. In my lifetime, I can't say that there's been any sort of boom in our relationship with the rest of the world or just the economy at home. Uh, as you all know, it was quite the opposite actually with the recession in '08, and then COVID hitting. Anyway, I've, I'm a bit of a history buff. I've gone down the history rabbit hole more than a few times, reading, watching documentaries, so on. I haven't read like 800-page types of, of literature on like the rise and fall of that particular Latin poet or anything like that, but I have familiarized myself with world history to a degree which I would say is greater than the average American, which perhaps you may be thinking is not saying much. In any case, whenever an empire enters an era of instability, there are many things that can happen. One, it can get worse, and often it does, until the empire is facing a near total collapse. And usually this is a result of incompetent leaders inheriting leadership positions, and then those leaders in turn rewarding sycophants, people who are simply put not qualified to do what they're appointed to do. They wreck the economy, they start wars, and if any of this is sounding familiar to you, stop me. Now, in the modern era, with Donald Trump, it's a unique spin on the old classic, you know? He is very much an authoritarian. Like, everything he says goes or you're out. Uh, if you've watched the cabinet meetings, it's just a spectacle, man. Um, I like suck him off harder is all I can say watching those things. And he shares that in common with pretty much most autocrats in recent and in recorded history. Just this obsequiousness displayed by the people around him because they are sycophants using him, they think, to get ahead themselves. Little do they know or realize that that typically backfires in the end, and he will either burn them or once he's gone, their political enemies will burn them. Either way, you put your trust in a guy like that, you will get burned. Um, if you are curious, I would recommend a movie called The Death of Stalin. Great comedy. Watched it a few years back. Just interesting and a great showcase of what life is like around a dictator with a comic tint to it. Um, and you'd find many parallels. Just the endless sucking up, the brutality. Trump isn't at the point where he can just have someone arrested, for example, for making a YouTube video about him and have them killed or carted off to a camp just like that. Unless you're an immigrant, of course. I mean, we're getting there, but we're still not there yet, or else I probably won't be posting this video. Um, but yeah, I just want to say he is the product of a corrupt capitalist system which rewards nepotism, which rewards wealth if you already have it. If you are wealthy in this country, it is much easier to garner more wealth than if you are poor. If you are poor, you have to climb mountains to get ahead. And the majority of Americans are feeling this. This isn't news to them. I'm just preaching to the choir. I don't know if any Rich people are browsing YouTube and will find my very tiny channel with like 5 subscribers and learn something, but it's just sad. All the presidents in history going back to George Washington, do you think they all had cabinets that are doing what Trump's current cabinet is doing? Do you think that all their cabinets were just sucking their dicks? No. Lincoln famously had shouting matches with his cabinet. His cabinet would flat out tell him when he was being stupid or wrong or if they disagreed. Same with Washington, same with Jefferson, same with all the fucking rest of them. They were always the best leaders in this country, gathered diverse opinions around them and worked from that. They didn't just hire a bunch of people who will say, yes, Mr. President, you're so great, Mr. President. Let me suck those balls more, Mr. President. No. That is something that we Americans took for granted would only happen elsewhere with under real dictatorships, autocrats, so on. That's Putin's Russia. That's Pinochet's Chile. Stalin's Soviet Union. Saddam's Iraq. You know? I don't, like, there's a quote going around online, you've probably seen it, but it's, I don't know who it's attributed to, but the quote goes something like, when fascism comes to America, it will come cloaked in the American flag and holding a Bible. And that's, that's the appeal for MAGA, patriotism, and religion. I understand that, and Trump definitely understood that when he walked, or, well, rather, escalated down in 2016. He's never been a religious man, at least until recently, because he's probably afraid of dying, it seems. But, oh man, he's just, Trump is a fucking idiot. We all, like, anyone who pays attention knows this. He rambles. He goes off based on instinct, which is informed by his own ego and not actual factual gatherings, no information, no statistics. He doesn't understand numbers. He doesn't read. He's as fake as his fucking slogan, "Make America Great Again." Just a gimmick of a slogan. They are all gimmicks, but this one especially pisses me off because it's made on the foundation that America is in decline. And sure, arguably when he ran for president in 2016, it was in decline, but it also is based on this notion that there was a particular time in America's history when it was great. But if you talk to anyone, we all have different opinions on when that precisely was. If you were a minority in this country, maybe we're not even there yet. Certainly, if you're a Latin immigrant, you're wondering, especially if you're from Mexico. Half of the continental United States used to belong to Mexico until they lost it in a war. So you're wondering, when was this great time for me, right? If you were rich and white, of course, it's been most of American history. You've benefited to some degree. Poor and white, not as much. You benefited sort of during a time when minorities were excluded to the point that, sure, there might have been some extra opportunity for you, but even then, the elites had their boots on your backs, and that much has not changed. People decrying DEI, despite not knowing exactly what that means. Diversity, equity, inclusion doesn't mean picking based on race or some sort of gender or quality or whatever that's not merit. It does not mean that. It simply means leveling the playing field. For example, the historically disenfranchised poor white population, right? If you're from rural Mississippi, but your cousin got into Harvard or something, it's DEI that's helping them pay for Harvard. It's not. Harvard isn't taking your bumfuck cousin because they think he's a good bet. They're taking him for his money, 1, for his good grades, 2, and 3, because the government is paying for much of his tuition. Substitute Harvard with any other institution and substitute your bumfuck cousin from Mississippi with any other person who comes from a poor background, right? Donald Trump was born in wealth, was handed wealth at birth, was bailed out by his rich father when his first businesses were failing. And this is all happening in a country where the financial system is set up to favor the wealthy. So if you are a wealthy businessman elite and your business fails, it's very easy for you to get back on your feet, at least relative to the rest of us, right? And his gullible followers somehow thought this dude who puts his name up in golden letters on failing businesses around the world was their savior, like was the Jesus to their movement. Jesus, by the way, being a poor Jew in the Middle East thousands of years ago, preaching about love and letting, the foreigner in, treating them as one of your own, all the things that MAGA says they believe in. That's not what Jesus preached. Of course it's not. But then MAGA, like Trump, doesn't read. Forgive me if you are MAGA and you've come across this. A lot of us are rather salty. And, the road away from ignorance is a shorter one than you think, but you will come across a lot of bitter voices along the way, and you don't necessarily deserve that. If you were grown up and were indoctrinated from a very early age, grew up in a religious environment, never really did much reading for yourself, but was told by those who did do some reading but who were corrupt that the world was a certain way, yeah, I can hardly blame you. But we are where we are currently, and so many fingers are pointing, and they really should all be pointing at the head honcho himself, and rightfully so. Most of them are, right? The sane portion of America hates Donald Trump, not dislikes him, not despises. Yes, despises. Despise, hate, same difference. Despise, probably a stronger connotation. It's not hate in the way that you would typically dislike a politician who's on the other side of the aisle in past cycles, right? No, we despise him because he's dismantling our democracy. And I think the only reason it's not happening faster is because it's clear he's fucking dying. And he's also demented old shit. If he dies in office, I guess Vance will be groomed to be his replacement. The Project 2025 people, who are also elevated to high positions in his cabinet, probably are panicking at that thought because Vance does not have the pull that Trump does. I think the only feasible way Vance could properly be his successor is if somehow before he kicks it, Trump eliminated free speech in the U.S., which is a tough sell. That is very much ingrained into our spirit. You would have riots day in and day out. That's not, it's just not something they can do, especially since he's like, the numbers are already out. It's clear he's unpopular. It's clear even his own voters are turning against him. The man operates, and I've heard other people comment on this. Someone I recently listened to said he has no intellectual internal aspect to him, which is definitely true. You hear it in the way he talks. He brags and boasts like he's your dumb cousin who, he can land a job but he can never really keep one. The only difference between that guy and Trump is Trump born rich in a country that favors the rich, so he's always been able to bounce back. And being a corrupt asshole, he's more than doubled his net worth since coming back to office, using the power of the presidency, which, critics of this line of thinking would say, oh, but past presidents have also gotten rich after leaving office. Well, that's the difference. They did it after leaving office. Not saying that was a good thing either. Like, you're using your celebrity as a political figure to gain wealth for yourself. Perhaps in the future, when we have a Congress that has wits and balls, we can approach this issue once more. But Trump is doing it while in office, leveraging the power of the presidency, which should be considered, if not sacred, it should be high up in the list of things that you rank as important in terms of American democracy. He's using that power with all that power entails, the military might, the economic might of the U.S. He's used it so far to start building $4 billion golf resorts in Qatar. He's used it to amass a fortune in crypto. It's all a lot. It's all too much. It's just flag after red flag after red flag. And I just simply despise the toadies he surrounded himself with. These religious, ideological rubes that are just constantly on their knees for Trump. They're running the country. It's not Trump. Trump is just there for photographs and signing and to look big and strong and powerful and to threaten smaller nations, right? That's his job. His cabinet, and I guess the folks at Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, they're running things. And God, I just hate them nearly as much as I hate Trump himself. There needs to be accountability in this country, or this country will collapse. It's plain and simple. It may not happen this year or the next, or even within the next 2 decades or my lifetime, but we are on a downward trajectory, and we have been for decades now. You know, Obama was a step in the right direction. Change, yes, we can. He did what he could following the recession, which he more or less inherited, right? Biden, for all his faults, did what he could following inheriting an economy that was suffering from a mishandling of COVID, which, if you'll recall, was Trump the first time. Both these presidents I just mentioned, Democrats, they were not perfect. They did not always get it right. Arguably, they engaged in certain levels of corruption themselves. And, you know, these things should always be examined and revisited and debated upon. But nothing to the level of what we're seeing now. Nixon spied on some people, spied on his political opponents in the famous Watergate scandal, infamous Watergate scandal, right? A little bit of light spying, and he's like, growing up, we were taught he was like the most corrupt president in U.S. history. Trump took a $400 million bribe, essentially in the form of a plane, from a foreign government, an authoritarian regime of a government. They're a monarchy, right? I don't profess to be a foreign policy expert, but a bribe is a bribe, and we can all see that one is a bribe. The crypto I mentioned, the favors from the media, Fox is just running propaganda 24/7 for Trump. His viewers, their viewers are deluded as to what's actually going on as Trump picks their pockets. At the end of the day, Donald Trump just, and you know, again, I'm probably preaching to the choir with this one, but he is the type of personality who will say all the right things to you. He'll promise you everything. And he'll come to you when you're at your lowest. Do you think it's a coincidence that he ran in 2016? And then again in 2024 it was probably because he wanted to stay out of prison. But in 2016, even though the economy was more or less on an upward trajectory after recovering from the recession, he still saw his opportunity. He still saw the divisions, especially across the Bible Belt and the South, and he saw that he could use that to his advantage. He may not be an intellectual. He may be a dumb fucking moron, and believe me, he is a dumb fucking moron, but he does understand power plays. That is something I believe he's very good at. He understands manipulation. He knows how to sell you your wildest dreams, market it in a way that seems almost feasible, and you even think to yourself, well, if he does even half of what he's saying, right, then sure, I'm on board, right? But that's the thing. He's always been a liar, a con artist. His businesses aren't successful. They don't last. He gets away with running them into the ground and still making a profit because he's a corrupt con man who tricks his shareholders, who tricks his investors, who tricks the contractors who just trying to make an honest buck. He stiffs them on the payment after they finish building his gaudy casinos or hotels or what have you. He is a sociopathic narcissist. Always has been. But at the same time, he's a coward. He's so weak. He's the weakest president in U.S. history. Corruption is weakness. I hope people understand this. He will, even before running for president, he would sue anyone who talked bad about him. Even though this is a free country, you can talk shit about anyone. He would try to ruin you because he didn't like what you said about him. And you want that guy to guard free speech and democracy and all that represents freedom? No. It's obvious his supporters they weren't politically literate. They didn't do research on policy or issues. They only understood that they were hurt. They were hurting bad, and this guy was coming around, this seemingly successful, wealthy product of the American system, saying, I will turn things around for you. I will leverage my wealth, my power, if you give it to me, to turn things around for you. And the Democrats, as much as they sometimes talk a good game, they often fail to deliver. And Trump comes at a time when the Democrats have failed to deliver, and that message was appealing for the vast majority of them. Of course, there are those who voted for Trump because they knew it would hurt others. They knew it would hurt the minorities. They knew it would promote a more white America, even though that isn't really a thing as much anymore. And those people are stupid. You can't do anything about stupid. Racism is expensive. And they're probably learning that one the hard way, if they even realize that that's what's going on. But yeah, presuming you weren't one of those types and you voted for the man, we understand why. It's sometimes hard to say no to a deal that on the outside looks too good to be true, but you're desperate. You're in a tight jam, you got a mortgage, you got bills, gas is expensive, groceries are expensive. It was no secret that he was a scumbag. But you thought maybe he could be our scumbag, right? Then again, there were probably those who didn't know he was a scumbag, right? The whole Epstein fiasco, which it's crazy how that caught like wildfire this late into the game because we've known about this shit since 2016. And you can't expect a man who's never walked in the shoes of one such as you or I to, number one, even understand our problems to begin with, two, know how to fix them. As a businessman, he was subpar. As a statesman, he had no experience, and even after garnering some experience as president, he's still subpar. I would say more than subpar. He is it's very early to tell. Any historian would say you don't come up with this sort of ranking until decades after the fact, but Trump, at least in my humble opinion, hands down the worst president we've ever had. Ever. Who was it who died a month into office? Was it Harrison, William Henry Harrison? Still a better president. Buchanan, who many lay the fault of, the acceleration towards civil war at the feet of, still a better president. Who else? Warren G. Harding, having affairs in the White House, enriching his corrupt friends, doing, arguably one of the most corrupt presidents in the history of the U.S., still a better president than this guy. None of those guys were ever a danger to the fabric of democracy in the sense that Trump currently is now. And, this is all off the cuff. I don't have a script as usual. I'm just got finished with my gig orders for the day. I'm going to head home, try to forget about the fact that I have rent, credit card debt, student loans to worry about. So, yeah, I say that to say if you really want to educate yourself, there are ample opportunities on this platform and others. There are those who have done deep dives into Trump, his narcissism, his dubious legacy and past. And I encourage you, if you are stepping outside of the bubble for the first time, to go ahead and educate yourself. Because as it stands, we still currently have free elections. I think midterms will be our last chance, maybe to turn this ship around. Maybe we'll get lucky. Trump kicks it before or right after, and then Vance is just too weak to really enact this dictatorial agenda that Trump has pushed in this presidency. But yeah, I just wanted to bitch and moan about one of the sources of my many problems, as I'm sure many others in the US want to do at this particular moment, and who agree that this dude is just bad news, this dude fucked us over, he'll continue fucking us over until he's gone, dead, out of office, what have you. And I, for one, look forward to that day. Thanks.